Hello, I'm Kathy Marshik, the Morrison County Veteran Service Officer, and I'm here today to have another one of our wonderful veterans who is very active in our community share his story about being in the military and retiring, and also what it's like to be overseas. Mr. Dan Noss, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then why you joined the military.
Okay, well, first of all, Kathy, I want to say thank you for having me here today for this discussion. My name is Danny Lane Noss. I was born in Minot, North Dakota, and I moved around a lot until in '69 my parents moved to Little Falls area. We lived out on Green Prairie Fish Lake, and then in 1970 I went into the service.
And what branch of service did you join?
Well, my good friend of mine, he's my brother-in-law now, we went down and talked to, we said we were going to talk to all four services. And the reason we went down that day is because our unemployment ran out, so we didn't have anything else to do. So we went down and we talked to the Army recruiter first, and that afternoon we came out with all the paperwork signed. But, you know, I enjoyed my career. I spent 22 years and 3 months to the day, all active duty. Yeah, in this area, if you say you're retired, most people think that you're retired from the National Guard. But in my case, I was all active duty.
And what's active duty life like? Because most of us from the Morrison County area, like you had said, we are National Guard. So it's nice to hear a little bit more about what it's like to live that 20-some years of active duty life and moving up the ranks, those kinds of things, and how much you have to move, actually.
Yeah, well, I had to, you know, I moved less when I was in the service than the 18 years before I went in, because my dad and my stepdad were in construction. So I lived in I moved 18 times by the time I was 18 years old. In my sophomore year of high school, I started school in Montana, went to 2 schools in North Dakota, and finished the sophomore year in Wisconsin. As far as the military part goes, you know, I actually moved less because you knew you were going to be somewhere for 3 years anyways. But I stayed longer in certain areas.
And so you met your wife, Sandy Noss, and when did you meet her?
I came home, I was stationed in Fort Des Moines in Des Moines, Iowa. And I came home one weekend by chance, and my mother said that the friend that I talked about previously was getting married that day. So and his wife lived in Randall. So I went to Randall and showed up at my father-in-law now's front door. And one person in there knew me, so they let me in. But that's when I first met my wife. She was 16 and I was 21.
And so she got introduced to this active duty life.
Yes.
Moving around.
Yeah, she's my wife's. You know, she's a good Minnesotan. She's a very strong person. She moved from the old house to the new house, which is about 50 feet, before she married me. And a month after we got married, I went back to Germany, and then she came to Germany. She flew. First time ever flying, she flew to Chicago, flew to New York, switched planes and switched airports, and flew to Germany. And I picked her up at the airport. So but as I say, she's a strong lady. We had a good time in Germany.
That's a huge change, going from Randall, Minnesota, all the way across the world to Germany.
Yes,
Wow.
it is.
Wow, and quite an adjustment. And so then, while you were in Germany, is that when you got stationed over in Saudi Arabia, and she was actually there probably by herself?
Well, I was there in Germany from '73 to '79, and we got married in '75, so she was there for 4 of those years. Then we went to Denver for a year, and then we went to Washington, D.C. for 2 different assignments for 7 years.
Okay.
And then we went back to Germany from 87 to 91. And during the Desert Shield, Desert Storm, I worked for 7th Personnel Group, which we managed the personnel centers in 7th Corps. And so we all went to Saudi Arabia. We got there on December 20th, and it was like 98 degrees. And I stayed there for 3 months. I think I left on March 19th. And I took a C5 from KKMC, which was King Khalid Military City, where we were, last place that we were stationed, signed over there. Took a C5 to Torrejón, Spain, and then took a C-130 from Torrejón to Italy and then back to Germany. But I came home early because I had orders to go to Fort Hood. So it's not like now when you have the whole unit coming back and you have all your different ceremonies and stuff. I got into Frankfurt and I caught a ride back to Stuttgart, and I just showed up at the door at 9 o'clock that night, back from the Gulf War.
Hi, I'm back home. That is
Yeah.
so different. First of all, for a lot of people that don't know what it's like, what is it like flying on a C-130?
Well, you're sitting on the side on a canvas seat, and it's a little different because it's all open, especially if you have to use the restroom, because that's a bucket that you pull down off the side of the wall, and you go behind a curtain and use it, and then you pull it back up the side of the wall and you go back and sit down. Yeah, C-130s are a little different.
Loud and a little chilly in there, aren't they?
Oh yeah, we had a desert parka on, but it was still a little chilly.
And then, so how did you feel coming back when there wasn't a whole lot of ceremony? Did that bother you at the time?
Well, I'd went in the service in the 1st of December 1970, and I had my basic training at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which I don't have it there anymore. And then I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky as a clerk typist training. And after that, my training there, that was February of 71, and I volunteered to go to Vietnam, but I came down on orders to go to Korea. There was like 12 people that were supposed to be sent over to Korea on a JustMag assignment. Now, JustMag is a joint service assignment. So I got to Korea, and I got to ASCOM, which was the replacement center, and the Army had canceled that project. So this is you got to understand, I'm an E3 coming, first time out of the United States in Korea, and since I canceled the project, they told us, here's a note with 4 units addresses on it. Get on that bus, go to Seoul, and find yourself a job for the next year. So I had to go to those 4 units and kind of interview to get a job as a clerk typist for that next year. And I walked into the Yongsan Data Processing Center, and the lieutenant colonel that was there, he said, do you play softball? And I said, yes. And he said, you're hired. So I spent 13 months in Korea. Then from there, I went to Fort Des Moines. And as I mentioned, I came home one time from Fort Des Moines. And that's when I met my wife. We've been married now, it'll be 44 years in May. Neither one of us wanted any children, and we never had children. So I really enjoyed the 22 years. And I tell people I don't feel old that I spent 22 years in, but I do feel old. I've been retired as of this Friday for 26 years. So that gives you an idea of how old I am.
Right.
But, it's, the thing is when I was in the Army, you go where you're told, and you go where you're needed. And in my 22 years and 3 months, I never had to fire one shell at an enemy, and I never had an enemy fire a shell at me. But that does not make me feel less of a soldier or less of a part of the military. I've run into people that say, well, I didn't really do anything because I was never in combat. And that just bothers me because it takes 5 to 6 people to support every rifleman. And it doesn't matter whether you're right there looking the enemy in the eye or if you're 100 miles back doing the morning report, or if you're a continent away providing supplies, you are part of that process, and you are doing what you've been assigned to do. So you're just as important. I'm sure there's people out there that'll disagree with me that have been in heavy combat, but that's my feeling of it.
And you're willing to put your life on the line. That's
Yeah. If
not
you're told-
everybody wants to do that.
Yeah. If you're told to go there, you'll go. But you were told that you were needed here and not there.
And there's a place for everybody and,
Yes.
and a piece of all of that. And
Yeah,
a
so
lot of
just-
people don't.
I just feel bad for people that say that, well, I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't that as much of a soldier because I wasn't in a combat zone.
Right. And some people have joined and never had to be sent anywhere,
Yep.
and that bothers them too, but yet it just wasn't their time to go.
It's just, you went where you were told to go, and that was your job, which is just as important.
But when you raise your hand and say, I want to join, that means that you want to join the military, and you say, I will protect my country, and you don't really know at that point what you may be sent to do. Some people join. I've had friends that joined and they were supply personnel and they're on convoys, and they were maybe women that had to serve. So you just never know where life takes you sometimes. What was it like? And in any time that you're gone from your family, there's a separation, and that part is difficult too. That a lot of people maybe don't see is you're away from your family. So it's difficult for the spouse who has to take over things that maybe they weren't used to, and then also for you because you're away from them and worried, or is everything okay? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Yeah, when I went to Saudi Arabia, my wife was in Germany, and she stayed there in Germany. And, I feel that the spouses, military spouses, do not get near the credit that they deserve, because they do. There are other employments where one spouse is gone for a while, but the difference is when you go to a war zone, you can be killed going downtown to get groceries, but when you go to a war zone, the chances of you not coming back, percentage-wise, are greater. So there's that difference there. But back in Germany, when my wife was there, she had trials and tribulations too, because we lived in Nellingen-Kaserne in Stuttgart, but the commissary was over on Robinson Barracks. And when she would leave Nellingen and go into Robinson and vice versa, she had to drive through all kinds of protesters screaming at them and flashing signs at them and everything else. It was. Plus, she also, like I said, she's a very strong person. We had 3 families, a single spouse, and then our friends, which had his wife and 2 girls, and then we had another family that both members went to Saudi Arabia, and the mother, the wife's mother, took care of 3 kids. One was like 2 years old, one was 6, one was 10. But Sandy helped them out with all of their needs, so to help make sure that they got, if they needed to get to the commissary, or they needed help or needed somebody to watch the kids. I feel she did a very big part of that when she was still in Germany.
When you deploy or when you leave, they do in a sense too, or they're part of it. When you join the military, the spouse is part of that. And if people have children, they're part of it too. I mean, they all have their piece of that puzzle where they've got to take over things when you take a piece of a puzzle out, someone else has to take care of those things. That's a huge part of it.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some people that'll agree with me on most of what I say, but being the mayor of a town, you always expect people to disagree with you. But like I said, I don't get the spouses don't get near the credit that they deserve.
Well, and it had to have been scary for Sandy to go over to an entirely different country, not knowing anybody. Your family's back here, and you've always lived in a small town. That's a huge adjustment. Yeah. Just probably almost as much as you going over to Saudi Arabia and living a life in the sand. But tell us a little bit about what it was like in Saudi Arabia. We
Well,
don't hear much about that, and
yeah.
I think it would be nice to hear more about what it's like over
Yeah.
there.
Now, I always say that I cannot identify with the house-to-house tactical techniques that they had to use in Iraq and Afghanistan, but I can identify in the living conditions because the same part of the country, except I understand they have fancier latrines now. When we were there in 1991, we had the Vietnam era latrines and showers. But you're out in the middle of the desert.
And did you guys have the burn pits and all those things to get rid of the?
Yeah, we had soldiers that were assigned to burn the
Waste.
The waste.
Yeah.
There we go. There we go. I had to think of a word to say it without saying that word.
I know.
But my job there, we were with the 7th Corps Rear, and then we had 2nd COSCOM, which is supply there. And our job was to maintain the database of all 500,000 people in country. When I first got to Saudi Arabia, we were in Dhahran, and our tent was right on the airstrip. So we would get the diskettes. Remember, this is 1991.
We had this
Yeah.
back then.
We'd get the diskettes and we'd update it into our database to keep track of everybody in country. And when you'd be laying on your cot, and we were on the blacktop there with our tent, and when the jets took off at night, your cot would walk across the blacktop. But I can say this, I know that I said I have not ever been in physical combat, but your mind still plays tricks on you. We were out in the middle of the desert at called Camp Ogden, and the night the air war started, our commanders put us in MOP 4 and had us take a nerve gas pill. Some people went down in the bunkers that were built. Our commander just said, lay back down on your bunk. Well, you're laying there not knowing, what's going on, and all of a sudden you hear this big roar, and it gets louder and it gets louder, and your cot starts jumping on the sand, and then all of a sudden it's gone. And in actuality, what it was a jet flying over on the way to Baghdad, 100 feet over your head. Well, those things cause enough vibrations and stuff, we weren't near worrying about being, hit or anything, but you don't know what it is. So, many things go through your mind when you're laying there.
I think more people know sometimes what's happening at home around you than you do, because while you're sitting there and you're living it, you don't know if that's something that they're using if the enemy's attacking you, or if that's a plane, because you're really in this little area and you don't get to see outside of that little area because you can't just drive. You don't have, did you have TVs?
No.
No.
We didn't have telephones. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have, we had, laptops for military purposes. But when we'd go make a phone call, they had a tent out in the middle of the desert. You had to drive for a half hour. You'd take an azimuth on your compass and say, okay, I go this azimuth, this many degrees for this far, then I turn and go this far, and there's a tent out in the middle of the desert with a whole bank of phones in there. And you couldn't call Germany, but you could call the States. And talk for about 2-3 minutes, and that was it. It's so much different now with Skype and email and everything that works throughout the military structure.
So when you called the United States, is there a way that you could call somewhere and they could connect you over to Germany at all? Or did you and Sandy just write back and forth?
Yeah, not that I know of.
Okay, so you guys would just write back and forth was your means of communication.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Different world today, isn't it?
I know it is. It's a lot different. Lot quicker, a lot faster. But during my military career, like I said, I went to Korea as a clerk typist, but I was assigned to Yongsan Data Processing Center. So I got introduced to computers. And back in that time frame, the first computer I ever worked on was called a Univac 1005. It took up 3 expandable Army vans for all of the different equipment, because most people don't remember the 80-column cards. And all of our data and all of our programs and everything were in those cards. You'd feed them in the machine, and they'd come out the other end, you put them back in the tray. From there, then I went to Fort Des Moines, where I worked at a AFI station, which is an Armed Forces, Army Air Force entrance station, where I processed records for people coming in. And then I went to school for a computer operator class on the Univac 1005. And then I went to Germany. And then from there I went to Denver. And from there we went to Washington, D.C. And when I was in Washington, D.C., I had went up to the rank of E7, which is Sergeant First Class. But in 1984, I applied for warrant officers through a program which I understand the Army still has, where 7s, 8s, and 9s can apply to W-2. And I was promoted from E7 to W-2. Then from there, I was in Alexandria, Virginia, working at the Military Personnel Center, creating documents that were used throughout the whole Army. And then from there, I went to National Security Agency as I made warrant officer to go to the National Computer Security Center. And that was very interesting because we would go out and evaluate DOD and defense contractor sites. We would evaluate the computer systems and then write a report on their vulnerabilities. So that was very, very interesting. The one that I can talk about is the White House Communications Agency. I was the final team leader on that, and that was very interesting. We went to places in the White House that nobody gets to see, unless you're on an assignment like that. So it was very, very interesting.
And then once you got out, now you've been very active in our community. You joined a lot of our veterans organizations. Want to tell us all the ones that you're involved in?
Well, I always believed in being involved in the community I live in. As I mentioned, I'm currently the mayor of Randall. I'm also the commander of Morrison County Disabled American Veterans, Chapter 12. I'm a member of, which you are also, of the Yellow Ribbon Network of Morrison County, which we do a lot to support the families of deployed soldiers or any one-time issues that any veteran has. I'm also the treasurer of the Camp Ripley Veteran State Trail. I'm the secretary of the Yellow Ribbon Network of Morrison County, and there's a couple other ones in there too, but those are the ones that I believe strongly in veterans. My wife, she's a very strong lady, but she's an introvert. She doesn't really like to get too involved, but she is 110% involved in Yellow Ribbon, as you know.
Right.
She believes a lot in the veterans, and so do I. And you being the VSO here, we had Paul Franzik before you. He'd been there for 27 years. He was really great. And we've had somebody new coming in. We're going, well, I wonder what it's going to be like. But you put all our fears down because you're just one of the best VSOs in the state.
Well, thank you. Just burst made my ego go up just a little bit, but thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Noss.
Well, thank you for having me here today, and I hope that people enjoy watching this.
I think they will. Mr. Dan Noss has done a terrific job. He's so active in our community. He is very supportive of our veterans. He's went above and beyond. He's helped people personally and physically move. He's helped people, so we're talking people that are homeless. We're talking people that have needed rides to the VA. When there's somebody that needs something in our community, Mr. Dan Noss has been there, him and his wife. It's tremendous. So he's been a huge asset to our community and to the Morrison County Veterans Service Office. I'm very proud to know you, and you are a hero to me and to everyone within our community. And I enjoy these stories and hearing a little more about your personal story.
Well, again, thank you for having me here today.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone, and I hope we have many more of these wonderful veteran stories. Bye.